Well, tonight we have a story about gambling and sport, about 4 members of Canada's national soccer team who took a great deal of money to lose a game. But unlike Pete Rose, 3 years later they haven't been suspended, they haven't been disciplined, and the tale of the game that they fixed hasn't been publicly told until tonight. It happened in Singapore, a country about a third the size of Prince Edward Island, halfway around the world, which must have seemed a long way from home for the 17 Canadian soccer players who arrived here in August of 1986. The Canadians had been told that Singaporeans have 2 great passions in life, soccer and gambling. Even the recreational games that occur throughout the city every evening, the equivalent of Industrial League hockey in Canada, attract spectators who aren't there to cheer on the guys from work, but to place bets on who gets the next goal or corner kick.
Anything that moves is a betting game. You can put 2 cockroaches and they'll take a bet.
Joe Dore is a sports reporter with the Straits Times. For the past 25 years, he's covered Singapore soccer and the bribery, corruption, and scandal that have plagued it.
A lot of foreign teams were approached by bookies in their hotels, offered large sums of money to players, 4 or 5, to sell games, you see.
Singapore's national symbol is the Merlion, a mythical creature that's part lion, part fish, from which the Merlion Cup takes its name. Canada's opposition in the tournament would come from the national teams of North Korea, Indonesia, China, Singapore, and Thailand. But the Canadians were favored to win. A year earlier, in this game against Honduras, they had qualified for the World Cup final in Mexico as one of soccer's top 16 teams.
Corner kick. Swings it in, near post, headed away, and it's in! It's in! Canada has got in front, 2-1!
And Igor Vrablic is the hero.
Toronto's Igor Vrablic, whose goal clinched Canada's World Cup berth, went on to Singapore to play in the Merlion Cup, as did several of his teammates. Some of those joining Vrablic were Paul James of Oakville, Ontario, Paul Dolan of Vancouver, Randy Reagan of Toronto, and David Norman from Coquitlam, BC. According to Paul Dolan, the players had been warned that as favorites, they might be targets for Singapore's gamblers.
A few of them were offered bribes to throw games. I wasn't personally, but we had the meeting, and that's when I became aware of it.
How did the team handle that? How did they approach the subject?
Well, we had a meeting, we got together, and we said what a ridiculous thing it would be to throw away a career, not only in Canadian soccer, but anywhere else that a player might play.
The gambling problem apparently resolved, the Canadians turned their attention to the national stadium, where the tournament began. Through the first round of play, Canada had 3 wins, a loss, and a tie, good enough for first place. Then on the eve of the playoffs, Paul James was invited to join 4 teammates in a friendly game of cards. And it became clear that the gambling problem hadn't been resolved at all.
They had disclosed to me exactly what had gone on during the previous 2 weeks of the tournament, and the fact that they'd been getting money for winning games, basically, and then for, by people from Singapore.
So essentially they were being paid by gamblers, presumably, to win games? I mean, didn't the gamblers assume that you were trying to win the games anyway?
I mean, now 2 years later, after the fact, I realized what was exactly going on with the gamblers were setting everything up for them to eventually lose a game.
At the table were Vrablic, Norman, World Cup substitute Chris Chuden of Vancouver, and a newcomer from Mississauga, Ontario, named Hector Marinaro. They told James that they wanted him to help them lose the semi-final game against North Korea. The day before the game, at the team's hotel, Igor Vrablic rounded up the others and took them by taxi to another hotel nearby. There they met 4 Asian men and a woman who explained the deal. The Canadians would lose to North Korea. In return, they'd get $15,000 US apiece. Later, Vrablic distributed envelopes containing a first installment of $7,500.
I mean, I don't even know if it was $7,500. I was told it was $7,500.
Did you count it?
I didn't count it, no. But it was a bundle of, I've never seen money like that before.
The semi-final took place here at the National Stadium, and though Canada and North Korea had met earlier in the tournament and played to a scoreless tie, the Canadians were favored to win.
Oh, here's a chance, and a goal! That's a great...
But despite the odds, North Korea scored first.
There's no question at all that the first goal I attributed to a mistake by Hector Marinaro.
Canadian coach Bob Bearpark, he didn't like what he saw either.
Later on in the game, I think about 15 minutes after half-time, I took Hector Marinaro out of the game and substituted him for another player.
And Paul James recalls an encounter he had on the field with Igor Vrablic.
I was playing fullback, and I got the ball, and I played it through to Alex Bunbury, who had a great chance for us to score. And I remember Vrablic really shouting at me because he was scared, because, I mean, that would have put us in, or put them in real trouble.
What did he say to you?
He said, you know, what the hell are you doing?
Well, it's certainly strange not to see Igor Vrablic in the thick of action. He's a big lad.
The final score was North Korea 2, Canada 0. Afterwards, Vrablic gave each of the others another $7,500 US. The night before the Canadians were to leave Singapore for home, here at the New Otani Hotel, Paul James told Vrablic, Marinaro, Norman, and Chuden that he had something to say to them.
So all four were present, and I just gave the 2 bundles of money that they'd given me.
Had you touched it? Had you spent it? Had you looked at it?
I hadn't touched it. I hadn't looked at it. It was in an envelope. And I just threw it on the bed, you know, and
What did you say?
Well, I said a lot of things. I mean, I really, you know, I had an emotional outburst.
During that trip back to Canada from Singapore, you sat next to Igor Vrablic. What did he say to you?
We talked about a lot of things, and he talked about, you know, the fact that, you know, the state of the game in Canada. And I think he felt bitter about that he hadn't made, you know, that much money through soccer.
Sports writer Joe Dore says if gamblers paid the Canadians a total of about $100,000, they stood to make a great deal more than that.
The saying is, if a team is offered $10, the bookmakers make $100.
So in the case of that game, you're saying that somewhere out there was almost $1 million
involved.
that they could gain by determining the outcome of the Canada-North Korea.
It's a strong possibility, yeah?
The story of what happened in Singapore might have remained a secret forever if it weren't for Paul James' conscience. Though he'd given the money back, he was so troubled that he told teammate Randy Reagan. Reagan spoke to Canadian captain Bruce Wilson, and Wilson informed the Canadian Soccer Association.
What gets said?
Kevin Pipe is Director General of the CSA, the organization that runs soccer in Canada.
Looking back, there was probably total shock on the part of all members on the board in terms of what actually had transpired. But quickly, it became evident that we had to deal with it as an issue confronting the association. And in fact, the decision that was taken within 20 minutes of learning about it was to call on our lawyers and to recommend that we commence with a criminal investigation.
The investigation was put in the hands of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They found large sums of money in U.S. cash deposited to the players' bank accounts shortly after they returned home. Upon his arrival in B.C., David Norman purchased this house in Coquitlam. When the RCMP asked where he got the down payment, Norman broke down and told them everything.
He admitted personally his involvement in accepting bribes during the course of the Merlion tournament.
Lorne McConnery was the Crown Attorney in Ottawa assigned to the case. He says that Norman's confession corroborated what they'd already been told by Paul James.
He set out the background as he had heard it from other players, that Igor Vrablic had first been approached by someone in Singapore. He talked about receiving funds earlier in the tournament after winning particular games, and that the sum of money increased dramatically for the last game which they were to lose.
But the wheels of justice turned slowly, and it wasn't until last December, more than 2 years after the Merlion Cup in Singapore, that the players had to face charges of accepting bribes. At the provincial courthouse in Ottawa, Paul James, who wasn't charged, told his story again. Then, because it was a Friday afternoon, court was adjourned.
The case was reconvened on the Monday morning after the weekend recess, but there were no more witnesses called, no more evidence heard, and the 4 players who had been charged with accepting bribes to fix the soccer games in Singapore weren't called to the stand. Instead, the judge ruled that whatever happened in Singapore had happened outside Canada, and therefore a Canadian court had no jurisdiction to rule. The judge quashed the charges against Igor Vrablic, David Norman, Chris Chuden, and Hector Marinaro. And the charges against Marinaro and Vrablic of bringing money into Canada that had been illegally obtained abroad were dropped.
While the 4 players walked out of the courtroom with no criminal records and no fear of further prosecution, Paul James says it seems that he's the one who's been punished most.
It seems every time I look at it and I look at my situation, and it's, you know, I've been right in the middle and been a loser and everything, you know, because, you know, even from the CSA's perspective, I mean, they put me in a position where I was just about the only one who got on the stand and had to testify. You know, not even the players who were guilty and did that didn't have to do anything.
More than 3 years later, all of the players who took the money in Singapore are continuing their soccer careers. Chris Chuden is a member of the San Diego Sockers, champions of the major indoor soccer league in the U.S., though when we tried to locate him, we were told that his phone had been disconnected and he'd left no forwarding address. However, we didn't have any trouble finding Hector Marinaro. He now plays for the Hamilton Steelers of the Canadian Soccer League. We tried to speak with him after a recent game.
Hector, can I have a word with you? I'm with the CBC.
Sure.
Name's Bob McEwen. We'd like to talk to you about what happened in Singapore. Basically, I guess we'd like to know why...
Marinaro isn't talking, and his teammates say that today the only reminder of his adventures abroad is his nickname, Singapore Sling.
Come on, guys. Over.
Regardless of injuries, regardless of what's going on, we've got to deal with it and go out there and play soccer.
Out west, David Norman plays in the Canadian Soccer League too, for the Edmonton Brickmen. He now claims his confession to the RCMP was made under duress, and he wouldn't talk to us about it. But he feels vindicated and complains that he hasn't been asked to represent Canada again.
It's only human nature, I think, that there is a little bit of bitterness, but you know, time does heal all wounds, and I hope that the CSA looks at it that way, and that you know, one day I'll have a chance to play for my country again.
In fact, the only player whose career seems to have taken a downturn since the Merlion Cup is ringleader Igor Vrablic. When the police questioned him, he admitted that he got the money in his bank account from gambling all right, but not in Singapore. He's sticking to the story that he won it during a junket to the casinos in Atlantic City. Vrablic now plays semi-pro soccer in Toronto for a team of Greek expatriates called Pan-Hellenic. And like Hector Marinaro, he's not talking either.
May we have a word with you?
I wish you speak to somebody
well,
else.
Well, we've been talking to Paul James about Singapore. He feels he's been victimized by that.
Well, good for him.
At their headquarters in Ottawa, more than 3 years later, the Canadian Soccer Association still has taken no action against the 4 players. In fact, the CSA is still debating whether it has the right to penalize players at all.
Has the Canadian Soccer Association disciplined players for any reason in the past?
Yes, although ultimately not in this same sort of circumstances. But,
for being out late the night before a game, for having a beer at the wrong time, for being caught with a woman in your room on the road? Do you have the power to discipline people if those things happen?
Those are internal sorts of team matters, which the coach and our national teams administer, which they would handle on an ongoing basis. But I know that, for example, we have fined players in the past for curfew violations and so on. So yes, I mean, ultimately we've done that. But I
so
think
you can get fined for staying out late at night, too late at night. But if you take $100,000 from gamblers in Singapore to lose a game to North Korea, you can go blithely about your way 3 years later.
Well, first of all, I have to emphasize that these are only allegations of activity against.
Well, I know you feel legally constrained here, but let's be frank about it. Paul James has told his story. David Norman has corroborated what James said. These are not simply allegations. These are the facts as related by the people who took part.
Yes, but from that perspective, they still are, from our point of view, allegations. We've obviously called one discipline committee hearing to investigate those allegations. So ultimately, in our view right now, the players still are innocent until proven guilty.
But back in Singapore, where they have considerably more experience in such matters, A member of a national team who's found to take a bribe faces the same charge as someone caught selling national secrets.
Normally it is known as treason. You're selling your country. So if you are really found guilty of such a thing, you are banned for life by the association.
Do you believe that's what it is? Is it treason?
Yeah, because you are selling away your country, see? That's a hell of a big offense.
Canadian coach Bob Bearpark.
I have no doubts that they were guilty of the crimes that they've been accused of committing. And I believe that they have no role to play in Canadian soccer. And I would like to see them certainly banned from the game here for a substantial period of time. If nothing else, not just that they then get their justice, but also I think as a message to other players that you know, bribery is a moral issue that nobody is going to tolerate in the game. And if you get involved in that, then you are going to be very, very severely punished.
Keep it going now.
Paul James is now the player coach of Ottawa's team in the Canadian Soccer League, the Intrepid. Just 26, he's considered a bright young man in soccer, a possible candidate to coach the national team one day himself. James wonders how he could come so close to throwing it all away.
I could never throw a game for Canada. I mean, I've loved every time I've gone on the field and put on a Canadian shirt. The accomplishment of playing the World Cup, it was every soccer player's dream. You know, and I can't believe that we've let Canada down.